I rent out my house in South Carolina on Airbnb when I'm not using it. It's a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house by the beach. 2 of the bedrooms are guest rooms accessible to the renters, while I keep the master bedroom locked for my personal belongings. Every time I visit, I ensure it's secure with both a regular lock and a deadbolt. This incident occurred early last spring when I decided to drive down from Chile, Massachusetts, where I reside most of the year. Since I work remotely, I have the flexibility to do so. Typically, I hire a cleaning lady to tidy up after guests, but this time, I plan to handle it myself since I was arriving right after the previous renter. The last renter, Ramon, seemed trustworthy, mentioning his fiancée and inquiring about local dining options. I generally prefer renting to couples or smaller groups of women to avoid potential damage from rowdy groups. I embarked on the long drive early in the morning, stopping only for brief breaks. Exhausted upon arrival around 10 p.m., I headed straight for bed without checking the house. However, I woke abruptly at 11:30 p.m., sensing something amiss. After a quick check, I found no signs of disturbance, but a review of the security footage revealed a lone man entering the house days earlier. Concerned, I messaged Ramon through Airbnb, then cautiously searched the house, finding no one. However, a quiet click from the master bedroom unsettled me. Despite calling out, there was no response. Peering under the door, I glimpsed feet, prompting me to grab a kitchen knife only to find it missing. Fearing for my safety, I dialed 911 and waited outside until the police arrived. To my disbelief, Ramon was found inside, claiming innocence and requesting one more night's stay. Despite my objections, the police released him, advising me to resolve the issue with Airbnb. Feeling failed by the authorities, I changed the lock code and contacted Airbnb, though I received no compensation for the extra night. While Ramon was banned from the platform, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability in my own home. I'm 26 years old, still living with my parents. I'm not content with my job, and I'm in a relationship that I'm not too sure about. To say I've been stressed would be a monumental understatement. 1 week, my mom and I were not getting along, and everything just felt overwhelming. I needed an escape, even if just for a weekend. So I looked into 1-bedroom Airbnbs up in the mountains and found a cheap one in Troutdale, Virginia, a couple of hours away. Based on the pictures, it seemed like a nice private and peaceful place surrounded by woods. It was fall, so I expected the foliage to be beautiful. I told my parents about my plan for the weekend. My mom seemed overly happy about me leaving, while my girlfriend found it weird and suspicious that I wanted to spend a weekend alone in some random cabin in the woods. On Friday, I packed a backpack with clothes, toiletries, and my laptop, then hit the road. It was about a 2.5-hour drive from door to door. Troutville was quiet and scenic, a perfect escape from the suburbs back home. I needed some time to myself. As I drove up a gravel road, my GPS informed me that I had arrived. Following the owner's instructions, I cut through an opening in the trees and made my way up to the cute little house sitting at the top of the hill. The fresh rural air instantly lifted my spirits. I let myself in using the key the owner had told me about. The place was cozy with a living room, small kitchen, bathroom, and a loft bedroom accessible by ladder stairs. There was a circular window over the bed, letting in plenty of light. I ventured out to explore the trails nearby. On my way back from the trails, I noticed 2 men walking down the gravel road. They stopped and stared at me as I passed, which felt off-putting. Ignoring it, I continued to the house, but their behavior lingered in my mind. I spent some time reading by the fireplace, enjoying the coziness. As the sun set, I decided to grab a quick bite. However, When I went outside to my car, I noticed the same two men running into the woods, seemingly in response to my presence. It was unsettling. Determined to be cautious, I messaged the owner about the incident. He reassured me that it was nothing to worry about, just locals walking around. Despite his response, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. I drove to the nearest Walmart for groceries since there were no stores nearby. By the time I returned, it was pitch black, with no streetlights on the gravel roads. Using my phone's flashlight, I made my way back to the house, feeling unnerved by the darkness. I locked the door behind me and settled in for the night, but then the power suddenly went out. Panicked, I messaged the owner again, but I couldn't bring myself to check the circuit box outside in the dark. My fear escalated when I heard a creak from the darkest corner of the room. I saw a tall figure, illuminated by the fireplace, demanding everything I had. Trembling, I complied, and he instructed me to stay in the kitchen before leaving with my belongings. Terrified, I called 911 and waited for help to arrive. An officer came, but all I could do was describe the two men I had seen earlier. The police couldn't offer much reassurance. Feeling shaken, I messaged the owner, who seemed sympathetic but refused to refund me for the terrifying experience. The trip I had hoped would provide a much-needed break only added to my stress. Though I was fortunate that I didn't lose anything valuable, the fear I experienced was unlike anything I'd felt before. I couldn't help but suspect the Airbnb host's involvement, as I still couldn't understand how the intruder gained access to the house. So, a few years back, after some friends and I graduated high school, we celebrated in the White Mountains National Forest Reserve. We only lived 2 or so hours away, so it wasn't much of a hike. We all packed inside my friend Alexis's car. Also with us was my friend Rob, his girlfriend Stephanie, and our friend Kelly. Alexis, his car was a Hyundai Accent, so a very small vehicle. We didn't pack much. We were headed to this Airbnb in Carroll, New Hampshire, at the height of the summer. It was a gorgeous drive. Once we got to the house, it was just as depicted in the photos. Only the pictures didn't include the shambling-looking shed next to the house. It seemed like it had seen better years. I probably could have knocked that down myself. Alexis joked around that maybe some old crazy guy lived in there, and that's why the place was so cheap. But we all laughed it off and unpacked our things. I'll be honest, I was really into Alexis, and I think she was into me on account that she said we should share a bed, more so because the third bedroom had 2 doors leading to the outside and had a perfect view of that old shed. So she didn't want to sleep there, and she wouldn't let me. We both put our things in the living room and made the pull-out couch our bed. Not much happened the first night. A little later, we all sat in the hot tub in the garage/rec room. Alexis sat next to me, and we faced the woods while Rob and his girlfriend were opposite of us. Rob's girlfriend couldn't step completely into the water on account of the stitches she just got. Stephanie and I were always good friends and carried on with stories and joked about high school, sipping on our potentially illegal wired booze. Kelly, on the other hand, was changing and not with us. Rob kicked my leg from under the water and winked, seeing how close Alexis was getting to me, but that wasn't too much of a deal. We tried to plan out our next day and talked about hiking to Mount Washington and the Flume Gorge. After a good soak, I eased into bed with Alexis, and we watched Rick and Morty for a while until the clock struck 2 a.m. And we sat outside. The stargazing here was supposed to be amazing, and a bit later, Kelly tagged along with us. What happened next was hard to explain. In front of the house was this huge deck that we were sitting on. It was pitch black, and no cars were around, more or less. We were in the middle of nowhere. No one really understands true silence until you're away from cars or planes for that matter. The sky was brightly lit, purple-blue, full of stars. Kelly hushed me one time. Just a few feet away from the porch, she heard some crunching as if something was approaching the deck. There was definitely something walking out there. I waved it off as a raccoon or fox until the steps sounded heavy, and I looked at Alexis. The fear began to set in as I noticed her gaze was looking towards the old shed where the footsteps had begun. Quickly I ushered the girls into the cabin and locked all the doors. I tried to explain to them that it's still possibly an animal, especially if animals had taken over that old shed. Easily, both of them calmed down. Kelly walked back into her room, and I again laid down beside Alexis. The next morning, I woke up to Robin, his girlfriend, cooking breakfast in the kitchen, which was just across the room from Alexis and me. We had a big day planned out, and we did quite a lot of hiking, with most of us forgetting what had transpired last night. Other than Alexis, when we came back from hiking, Alexis suggested exploring the old shed that was beside the house. Now that it was daylight, nothing that bad could happen, right? And I'll be honest, I didn't want to, but I didn't want Alexis to think I was a wuss. We opened the screen door, investigating the first room. There was an old rickety rocking chair that seemed it might break if I tried to sit in it. The next door had one of those brass doorknobs, but it was rusted and dented. I looked at Alexis before grabbing the door, and she groaned as she opened the door. There wasn't much to the room. The floor was dirt. There were dirt-caked windows and some trash on the floor. Alexis made a point that it smelled of cigarette smoke. It may have been the designated smoking spot for the Airbnb. We both shrugged it off and joined the others out back. Rob was starting a fire. Some typical conversation was going on. Rob poked fun at Alexis and me. The sun set, and I turned off the floodlight out back to make the ambience of our fire nicer. Some chuckles and stories were passed around, Rob and I boasting about our feats and whatnot. Then there grew a silence. That same crunching from last night is heard behind us just against the tree line, except it was faster and headed in our direction. And just like that, there was a flash of green light lighting up the entirety of the backyard for just a moment. But my thoughts were ruptured by Stephanie's screams as she bolted towards the house. Behind us, a blood-curdling cry or yelp was heard, a deafening sound that at first we thought was a siren. I instantly stood up, yelling for everyone to get inside. Stephanie must have seen whatever it was that made that cry. In my bolt, I accidentally knocked over Kelly, who hadn't gathered the entire. In June of 2018, Boston area anesthesiologist Jaleesa Jackson and her partner, Dozy, decided on a week's vacation in Southern California. Jaleesa, 29 years old, and Dozy, 28 years old, had met while studying at the prestigious Johns Hopkins University of Medicine down in Baltimore, and were already an item by the time they moved up to Boston together. Their personal life was hallmarked by a deeply loving romantic relationship, but their professional lives were deeply stressful, with each routinely working 14-hour shifts either 5 or 6 days a week. And even on their days off, they were sometimes called into work to conduct essential medical procedures. Each of them found this lifestyle to be utterly exhausting. So when it came time to pick a vacation spot, they chose a place as far away from Boston as they possibly could Los Angeles. After traveling 3,000 miles across the country, they checked into a small oceanside guest house they rented via Airbnb. The place had some truly excellent reviews, and its owner was so popular with those that rented from him that the company had designated him a superhost, meaning he provided almost flawless customer service while making himself easily available to those that stayed at the property. Waiting for them at the property was a chilled bottle of wine, along with a friendly welcome note from the owner, who referred to themselves as JJ. He wished them a delightful stay, thanked them for their custom, then left his contact details just in case they needed anything, Feeling like they were in safe hands, Julissa and Dozy packed away their things and settled in for the night. They believed that they were in for a dream vacation, the perfect antidote to their high-pressure, career-driven lives. Little did they know their vacation would turn into a living nightmare. Around 5:30 the next morning, the couple woke up to the sound of a loud and violent banging sound coming from the front door. The commotion just about frightened the life out of them, but a brave Julissa grabbed her phone, readied herself to call 911, then approached the front door to see what was going on. As she got closer, she heard a rough male voice barking, "I know you're in there." Kevin Julissa peered through the door's peephole, spying an unhinged, enraged man on the other side. And after barking at him to get away from the property, she decided to call JJ to let him know what was going on. But then, just as the dial tone started, the sound of the phone ringing could be heard from the other side of the door. Julissa then opened the door, looked the man dead in the face, and asked JJ, yet the man simply looked up at her with a startled look on his face, then ran off into the night. As you can imagine, Julissa was horribly confused, as was Dozy when the details of the incident were relayed to him. Then, demanding an answer, Julissa began calling JJ incessantly until he finally answered his phone. JJ seemed completely unapologetic regarding the bizarre incident and told Julissa, "Yeah, that was me. Sorry about the confusion, but that's too short for me to give you an explanation. Have a nice time in LA." Julissa tried to fish for more of an explanation. The muse and outrage that a so-called superhost who would seem so warm and friendly in their welcome note turned out to be anything but. But before she had a chance to ask him anything, JJ hung up on her. "Maybe things are just different on the West Coast," Julissa told Dozy in an attempt to explain JJ's bizarre and alarming behavior, and both agreed that it certainly made for a memorable welcome to one of the United States' most famous cities. The couple then spent the day at a nearby beach, and by the time the sun began to set, that morning's incident was almost completely forgotten. When they were done at the beach, Julissa and Dozy made their way back to their Airbnb, with the remainder of their evening being pleasantly uneventful. They finished off the rest of their wine, made some of the best tacos they'd ever eaten in their lives, then sank into bliss while enjoying a saccharine rom-com courtesy of Netflix. It was only after they'd retired to bed did the terror ramp up exponentially. Shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning, the couple was scared out of their skin when a hooded figure literally came crashing through the large window of their darkened bedroom. The violent intrusion sent shards of glass everywhere, and both halves of the couple let out screams of terror as the figure smashed their way into the bedroom. I had no idea what was happening to Dozy, but I reacted like we were under attack. In an instant, the 230-pound, 6-foot Dozy leapt on the man as he lay there motionless on the bedroom floor. He tore up his bare feet on the broken glass in the process, but the surging adrenaline meant he barely felt it. In the moment, all that mattered was securing and detaining the maniacal intruder. So, as he shoved his knee into the intruder's back, Dozy screamed at Julissa. "Call 911, he later said that he'd feared that the man might be hiding a weapon, or that more intruders might be attempting to force their way into the residence. As Julissa grabbed her phone and rushed to call 911, her boyfriend barked at her to hide under the table, just in case any other armed men were about to burst into the bedroom. Julissa made a mental note of the man's attire, the goal of which was to provide as accurate a description as possible to the emergency dispatcher. Yet when she tried to get a look at his face, and as the hood of his jacket began to work its way back from his face, she noticed something that instantly sent chills through her. "JJ," she called out, recognizing their so-called superhost as the man who had just smashed his way into the bedroom. Dozy was so shocked by his girlfriend's cry that he took his knee off of JJ's back, turning them over to confirm that the person terrorizing them was actually their apparent benevolent landlord, At the moment he loosened his grip, JJ tore himself free, then bolted from the building as fast as his legs could carry him. Minutes later, Julissa Jackson was telling the police that they had just been attacked by their own Airbnb host, and that he had gone crazy, and that they needed assistance as soon as possible. Then, while awaiting the arrival of armed officers, Julissa and Dozy armed themselves with the biggest kitchen knives, then hunkered down in preparation for another assault. While they waited, they suddenly heard the sounds of the helicopter hovering overhead. Then moments later, the courtyard between the guest house and the main house was awash with flashing light. Julissa then noticed two police officers leading a handcuffed man back towards the property. It was JJ, and he was ranting and raving about cleaning fees. He had apparently told the police that he had ordered his tenants to move out after they failed to pay cleaning fees. But as the commotion unfolded, an elderly woman emerged from the main house and asked what was going on. It turned out that the woman was the property's true owner, and that she had rented the guest house out. I opened up my home as an Airbnb. Within the first month, I ended up delisting it from the website and scrapping the entire idea. My wife and I had been trying to sell our old home for over a year before we decided to turn it into an Airbnb. So we didn't really have strict rules about the place, as long as it was kept nice and the guests cleaned up after themselves. Our plan was to let anyone stay there for as long as they needed to. The only thing that we did when we listed the house was get a single security camera that we placed in plain view at the entrance of the house, facing the front door. That way we could see anyone who entered the home. Now, the first two guests that we hosted were so friendly and kept the house very clean. So my wife and I were actually very excited that we decided to take a chance on renting out our old home. That quickly changed though when one day I checked the camera after our third set of guests had supposedly left. They finished up their booking, and when it was done, we got the text that they left the key on the counter, and we thanked them for their business. When I checked the camera, however, I noticed that it was facing the opposite direction, and all I could see was the wall behind it. I called my wife, who was still at work, and let her know that I was going to be running over to the old home to check on it and fix the camera. And then I got into my truck and made my way down the road. The house that we listed for Airbnb was only about 25 minutes from the house that we currently lived in, so I got there in no time. However, it was around 7:30 at night, so the driveway was pretty dark when I pulled into it. I figured that they must have just turned the porch light off and forgot to turn it back on before leaving. Again, it was no big deal, but I definitely noticed how dark it was. I carefully made my way up the gravel path to the front door of the house, and this is where things took a serious turn. As I reached out for the handle, the door ended up swinging open on its own without me even touching it. I was really confused by that, so I took a second before walking inside. But as I looked into the house, I couldn't see anything unusual. Eventually, I mustered up the courage and made my way through the threshold and into the home. That was when I felt something hard hit me from behind. I dropped to my knees and then turned around as fast as I could to see what had hit me. And that was when I saw someone standing in my house holding something in their hand that looked like a bat or pole of some sort. I put my hands up in front of my face to protect myself from any incoming attack. But that was when I was grabbed from behind by another assailant. They pulled me to the ground and held me there as the man who struck me in the back began digging through my pockets. They pulled my phone, my keys, and my wallet out of my pocket before letting me go. But I didn't even get to pick myself off the ground before I was struck over the head with a bat again. Everything around me went black as I fell back to the ground. I woke up a couple of hours later to my wife, who was shaking me awake. She said that an ambulance was on the way, and that she had come to check on me after she got home from work and noticed that I still wasn't back. My wife also told me that my car wasn't in the driveway, and I knew right away that they had stolen it. After the ambulance came, I told my wife to call the police and to cancel the cards that we had in my wallet. I ended up needing 3 stitches on my forehead where I had been hit by the one assailant. And according to the police, there was no evidence that would help us find them. They never even found my car. We immediately chose to delist the house from Airbnb and just try to continue to sell it.